Hi, my name is Jason. Today we're going to be looking at Bill Bratton and his career as the New York Police Commissioner. So it was February of 1994 in New York City. William Bratton had just been appointed police commissioner after 3 decades of increased crime in what the press referred to as the Rotten Apple. At the time, the city was filled with prostitution, robbery, felony crime, and much more. For William Bratton, this would be his 5th city he undertook the arduous challenge of turning around. Standing next to Mayor Giuliani, he addresses the public for the first time as Commissioner Bratton. As he begins to address the audience, he says, just imagine New York City as one of the safest large cities in the nation. But we don't have to imagine. In the last 2 years, without an increase in his budget, he turned New York City into the safest large city in the nation. As authors W. Con Kim and Renee Mulburn Rice in their article Tipping Point Leadership, between 1994 and 1996, felony crime fell 39%, murders 50%, theft 35%. Gallup polls reported that public confidence in the New York Police Department jumped from 37% to 73%, even as internal surveys showed job satisfaction in the police department reaching an all-time high. The authors describe the strategy employed by Bratton as tipping point leadership. There are 4 steps to the tipping point that we're going to discuss today. The first is breaking through the cognitive hurdle. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You've been invited to an hour-and-a-half long meeting, and you, like everyone else, is sitting there trying to figure out what you're about to do. A little bit later, your mind starts to wander. Think about all the emails you have to respond to, the long list of to-dos you have to accomplish before the end of today. When is this meeting going to start, you think? After about 10 minutes of waiting there, finally your manager starts speaking. They've prepared handouts and PowerPoints. They've begun to articulate how sales are down by 20%. They show you fancy graphs and how they broke the numbers down by region and product. And now, after you've reached your breaking point, in terms of your mind just being able to take in all this information, you begin to do as they talk about their plan. They're really excited about their plan, they begin to say, and it's a good plan. We're going to reformat how compensation is managed. Now they've caught your attention. We're going to do this, and as a result, we're going to increase our sales, and you will all have larger portfolios. It's a great plan, just trust us. Any questions, they ask. A few of the more vocal people begin to speak out, and they're met with reassurance that they've thought through all the possible scenarios, and that we've made sure that all your needs have been met. So Bill Bratton, he opens up his emails to find his request for new cars has been approved. However, they've selected smaller compact cars, electric ones. Everyone loves electric cars these days. The email writes that they're cheaper, which means that we'll be able to buy more. And because you're electric, your department will save money, which you can then invest in other areas. Bratton picks up the phone and says, Jim, I made that name up. Jim, he says, there are big things happening in the Big Apple, and I want to give you a tour of all of them. Bratton proceeds to pick him up in the car model that Jim has approved for purchase. Before doing so, though, Bratton decides he's going to pull the seats way back so he can demonstrate how little legroom someone in the back will have if a 6-foot officer was driving. He also decides that he's going to wear his full belt with his gun, his holster, his baton, extra ammo, to demonstrate how little room an officer would have in the seat itself. He then proceeds to drive over every pothole he can possibly find to show how uncomfortable the ride would be. And after 2 hours, Jim is begging to get out, and Bratton receives his larger cars. In another example, Bratton is proposing a reorganization of resources. Many of the things he is hearing is that people don't feel safe in the subways. This is met by resistance by his police chiefs. They argue that subway crimes account for just 3% of reported instances. They argue it doesn't make sense for us to pull out cops from other locations for just 3%, and 3% is a pretty compelling case. Bratton listens, and he tells all his police chiefs that from now on, every one of them, including himself, will be taking the subway to work. As they did so, they noticed the number of homeless people sleeping in the subway, the number of gang members that hung out there, the graffiti on the walls, the number of people who just jumped at turnstiles, the lack of law enforcement presence. All of a sudden, his police chiefs began to realize there are serious issues that need to be addressed, and began to reallocate more cops to the subway. This is only step one, however, for Bratton. And before we move to step two, I want to talk through some key points. One of the most important takeaways from the story is that Bratton got people to understand why change was important. He did that through getting people to experience the challenges he was trying to address, and he did it from the point of view of where change was occurring. When he was trying to purchase new cars, he got his approval manager to experience this change and what this change would mean from the point of view of the cops that would have to use them day in and day out. In contrast to the first story, too often leaders tried to convince people using logic, reason, and numbers right out the gate. David Garber and Michael Roberto wrote an article called Change Through Persuasion. In it, they write, faced with the need for massive change, most managers respond predictably. They revamp their organization's strategy, they round up the usual set of suspects, people, pay, and processes, sifting around staff, realigning initiatives, and rooting out efficiencies. Then they wait patiently for performance to improve, only to be bitterly disappointed. For some reason, the right things still don't seem to happen. In their approach to change management, they divide it into two parts. The persuasion process, which breaks down into a four-phase communication strategy, and the implementation plan itself. Their four-stage persuasion campaign is as follows. First, they prepare the organization's cultural soil months before setting around the turnaround plan into concrete, by convincing employees that your company can survive only through radical change. Second, they present the plan, explaining in detail its purpose and expected impact. 3, after executing the plan, they manage employees' emotions by acknowledging the pain of change, while keeping people focused on the hard work ahead. And lastly, as the turnaround starts generating results, reinforcing desired behavior changes prevents backsliding. The authors describe a process of winning over the minds, hearts, and hands of their employees. And they write, on a cognitive level, employees in receptive environments are better able to let go of competing, unsubstantiated views of the nature and extent of the problems facing their organizations. They hold the same objective views of the causes of poor performance. They acknowledge the seriousness of current financial, operational, and marketplace difficulties, and they take responsibility for their own contributions to those problems. Such a shared, fact-based diagnosis is critical to move forward. On an emotional level, employees in receptive environments identify with the organization and its values, are committed to its continued existence. They believe that the organization stands for something more than profitability, market share, or stock performance, and is therefore worth saving. Equally important, they trust the leader, believing that he or she shares their values and will fight to preserve them. Leaders earn considerable latitude from employees, and their proposals usually get the benefit of doubt when their hearts are thought to be in the right place. Workers in such environments also have physical hands-on experience with the new behaviors expected of them. They have seen the coming changes up close and understand what they are getting into. So, I really want you to take notice of how much of the process takes place before you implement change. Equally important, how much communication happens after you begin to implement the change. The last point I want to make on this phase comes from Leading Change, Why Transformations Fail by John Kotter. We talked about the changing the minds of your employees to create a sense of urgency, and change needs to happen. But at what point is the urgency rate high enough? According to Kotter, the answer is about 75% of a company's management is when about 75% of a company's management is honestly convinced that business as usual is totally unacceptable. Sun Tzu once said, "Good generals go to war and win, great generals win and then go to war." So the next step is sidestepping the resource hurdle. Let's say you've been a good leader and you've managed to get your team not just to understand why change needs to occur, but truly believe in the change initiative itself and be able to articulate that message to their teams. Trains derail quickly when they run out of tracks. This step is understanding your existing resources and being able to better utilize them. In Kim and Marberg's article, Tipping Point Leadership, they talk about the New York City narcotic unit. So prior to Bratton coming in, this was seen as a second priority, mostly because they felt that responding to 911 calls ought to be the top priority. So Bill calls this meeting with his deputy commissioners of strategy and all the police chiefs, and he asks them one simple question. What estimate of percentage of crimes attributed to narcotic use, he says. Most respond 50%, some were as high as 70%, others as low as 30%. Would you agree, he continued, perhaps the narcotics unit consisting of less than 5% of the police force seemed a bit understaffed. What's more, the authors detail, is that it turned out the unit only worked Monday to Friday because it was always done that way, despite the fact that drugs were sold in large quantities and drug-related crimes persistently occurred on the weekends. So there's this bank in Turkey, and they recently hired a 35-year-old, not becoming manager, to oversee changes in their retail stores. In fact, upon hire, they tell her, "We are bringing you in to make massive radical changes." So after months of mass marketing and emails to all the staff, she decides she's going to go visit branches. Many banks at this time are moving to mobile applications, and trying to be a step ahead of everyone, she proposes an idea of building a platform in which users or customers can do their banking from kiosks in retail stores. So if they want to apply for a loan, if they want to take out money, anything they need to do, they can speak with an attendant over a virtual system like Skype, for example, and they can use this platform to do their mobile banking. So she goes to one of these local branches and she speaks with the chief technology officer, and he isn't convinced this plan is going to work. He says there's no proof of concept, and to do what's being asked will require him and his team to put a lot more hours in addition to what they're already doing, and they're going to have to be here most weekends until the project is over because of the timelines. She replies to him that he's right, part of creating these kiosks, though, is to determine if it's viable and to determine a proof of concept. And so she presses on and says she was hired to make radical change, and this is something we're going to do. When we talk about resources, this can be money, staffing, time, tangible items like equipment, raw materials, you name it. Every organization works off of limited resources. This step is not about trying to squeeze more out of your staff, your time, your equipment, but rather it's about working smarter and better utilizing resources where it makes sense. There are two major tools that leaders use. Many of you probably have heard of them. They're called Lean and Sigma 6. I won't be getting into these in this video, but I'm hoping to create another one that goes over process management that can provide some helpful strategies. The next step is jumping the motivational hurdle. To jump the motivational hurdle, Bratton singles out key influencers or people inside or outside the organization with a disproportionate power due to their connections with the organization, their ability to persuade, or their ability to block access to resources. His approach to motivating his key influencers is to put them under the spotlight. To that end, what he did is he instituted a semi-weekly strategy review meeting that brought the top brass together within the city's 76th precinct. So what he did is he invited these 76 precinct commanders, each who commanded about 200 to 400 officers. And attendance to these meetings was mandatory. And the way that it was conducted was that each commander was given only 2 days notice. And they would stand in front of a panel, the precinct commander, of senior staff, and they would be questioned about their precinct's performance. He or she would then be responsible for explaining the projected maps and charts from a crime database that Bratton had developed. So there are many books written about how to motivate staff. The one that I think best describes Bratton's strategy is a book called Extreme Ownership, written by two Navy SEALs, Jocko Willings and Lake Babylon. So in their book, they teach that there are no bad teams, only bad leaders. And to that end, they emphasize the importance of leadership, and that the leader taking extreme ownership of everything that happens under him or her, because ultimately they are responsible for everything that happens under him or her. They write that there are only two characteristics that matter in leadership, whether they are ineffective or effective. Bratton, by forcing the precinct commanders to present in front of every other precinct commanders, forces them to take ownership of what their officers are doing. They could not place blame on any neighboring precinct because they would be sitting in the room next to them. With the maps and charts from Bratton's crime database displayed, there was no hiding from their performance. Another important lesson that the two Navy SEALs teach us is that it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. So Bratton has set up these high standards that every precinct had to use this database to determine what our priorities were and how we were going to allocate resources, i.e. police. And by having these officers stand in front of their peers and their high commanders, looking at this crime database and looking at the spikes in felony and narcotics and looking at how they responded, they were being held accountable to their performance, and he was sending a clear message that failure to do so would not be tolerated. Those who watched would know that they could be axed in only 2 days' notice and they could be next. And so for them, they knew that they needed to be performed to standards, or they too would have to explain their shortcomings. The last step to achieve the tipping point is to knock over the political hurdle. So Kim and Marbury writes that the more likely change becomes, the more fiercely and vocal you have these negative influences, both internal and external, and they'll fight to protect their position, and their resistance can seriously damage or even derail the reform process. To silence these naysayers, Bratton ensures that he had respected senior leaders inside the top teams. This allowed him to identify those who were not aligned with the new change initiatives and to address them before they can begin to create doubt amongst others. So these were the 4 steps to achieving the tipping point. And I want to thank you for watching. As you review this video, I want you to take careful observation and study of how Bratton had operated in comparison to some of the other stories that we mentioned. I'll be doing other videos on the topic of change management. I hope you like this. Once again, my name is Jason, and thank you for visiting.